again guys, welcome back to the channel. In today's video we are going to be taking a look at the Wing42 Boeing 247D. It's worth stating from the get-go that this video is not going to be a full review of the aircraft. Whilst I would like to carry out a full review, and there's certainly plenty to show you with the Boeing 247, unfortunately, as some of you will have seen from my post earlier on in the week, life is pretty hectic at the moment, and it's probably going to remain that way for some time to come. So today is a little bit of a freebie for me. We're just going to be taking a typical flight in the Boeing 247. We're currently on the ground in Chagual in Peru's northwestern coastal region. We've been running the morning mail along with a few supplies over from the city of Trujillo. And for our flight today we're going to be picking up the return sector back towards Trujillo, again carrying a little bit of mail and a few supplies with us back towards home base. Although this isn't a full review, there is certainly quite a bit that we can discuss about the Wing42 Boeing 247. We'll try and talk about the aircraft as much as we can en route, but just to cover things off, at the end of the video we'll also go into some detail on what I've found with the product to date. Anyway guys, as always I do hope you enjoyed the flight. If you do, please consider giving the video a like. If you want to see more content from the channel, then please consider subscribing as well. Our ground handlers are just loading the last of the mail on board the aircraft, so let's head for the cockpit and we'll begin running through the startup process. So welcome to the cockpit of the really rather excellent Wing42 Boeing 247D. We've got all of the cargo now on board the aircraft and we are ready to run through the startup checks. Unfortunately the aircraft is pretty vague in terms of checklists. There's not a whole lot there in the manual. There's no in-sim checklist, and of course it's quite tricky to find a real-world Boeing 247 checklist. Nonetheless, I do think we have enough to get the aircraft started up, so we'll run through that. We'll first get the aircraft electrically powered so the battery master can go on. Parking brake is set on. We'll check our fuel quantities. The aircraft should be pretty well fueled up. We've fully fueled out of Trujillo. We obviously burned a bit getting over towards Chagual. We've got about 110 US gallons there on the left main. Checking the right main. And we're showing about 60 US gallons. And lastly checking the right auxiliary. And we're showing a full fuel load there on the right auxiliary of 70 US gallons. So we'll start the aircraft on the right auxiliary tank. Engine selectors can go to both. That's going to allow fuel to run to both of the carburetors. For the fuel selector, again we'll go onto the right auxiliary tank. So we have right auxiliary selected. We'll exercise the wobble pump. We're looking for between 4 and 5 psi in terms of fuel pressure. And showing 5 psi there now on both sides. The engine is fairly cold, so we'll need to prime. We'll come onto the left, and the main valve can go on. It's above freezing outside, so we'll prime 3 times. And just locking that primer once again. And we'll keep exercising the wobble pump throughout, just to keep the fuel pressure up. So the ignition master switch is on, magnetos can go onto both. Mixtures are set fully rich, propellers are set to fully fine. We'll crack the throttles around 25%, that's a little bit higher than the manuals, but I find it is necessary for the start. We'll have the ground engineer wind up our flywheel. You can hear him cranking that up as we speak. And just checking that the prop's clear. We're not going to call clear prop, we've already got the ground engineer out there for us. You can hear the flywheel still spooling up currently. And it now sounds like we've got maximum rotation, so we'll get the ground engineer to mesh the flywheel. And we have a good start there on the left. Oil pressure's come up nicely, showing about 90 psi there on the left. And the RPM's just come up to around 1,000. We'll idle just below that for the time being. The engine-driven generator is on the left-hand engine, so we're all good now in terms of electrical power. And we'll run through the same process on the right. So once again, engine selector is set to both, fuel tank selector is on auxiliary. We'll exercise the wobble pump a few times. And we can now put the engine selector onto the right for the primer. So there's 1, 2, and 3 primes. We'll lock that once again. Ignition master is on, mags can go to both. Again, checking the prop area is clear. We'll get the ground engineer to wind up the flywheel now on the right hand engine. Oil temperature still coming up there on the left. We've got the oil shutters closed for the time being, just to try and build up a little bit of oil temperature. And the ground engineer just taking a little bit of time to position into place before he gets that flywheel going. Fuel pressure still good there on the right currently. And a little bit tricky to hit that flywheel over the sound of the left engine, but we should be good to mesh now. And we do have a good start there on the right. So 2 successive good starts there. That's a pretty rare occurrence on the Boeing 247. That's nice to see. Once again, the oil pressure has come up. RPMs are looking good. Oil temperature should start to rise, and the vacuum instruments coming there as well now that we have the right-hand engine running. That does run the vacuum pumps. So 2 good starts will allow the engines to warm up. In the meantime, we'll set up the flight instruments. On the compass there, showing a heading of about 340, we'll set that on the directional gyro. And we have 340. We are just out to the right there of 340 on the compass. It looks as though the increments there on the gyro are fairly significant, so we can't set that too accurately. Just checking our carb temps as well. Still pretty cold obviously at the moment. Anyway, we're just going to sit here a little bit longer. We'll allow the engines to warm up, so we'll probably sit here for around 5 minutes until those oil temps come up nicely. After that, we'll make our way out towards the runway, and I'll come back to you again once we're ready for the run-up. Okay, so we're nicely lined up here now on runway 32. We'll first check our flight instruments. Once again, we are showing the correct heading. The altimeter is set. Flight instruments look good. Flight controls. Are full and free. Fuel, we'll switch over to the left main tank now. And we'll carry out a quick run up before we go, so fully back on the stick, coming up to 2000 RPM. Just get the oil shutters opened up before we do that. Of course, just to try and keep the oil temperatures down here as we carry out the run up.
Buenas tardes, contacto radar, agenda 7000 pies con 1011. Buenas tardes, 1011 para Bienvenido 038, localización de posición, vuelo directo a Junta, descienda a 8.
And we're just going to lean out the mix just slightly as well, since we're up at around 4,000 feet aerodrome elevation. So there's 2000 RPM both on the left and the right. Engine temperatures and pressures look good. We'll check the magnetos. Checking the left engine first. And onto the right mag there we do have a slight drop. Back to both. And onto the left. So everything nicely within tolerances on the left engine. We'll check the right. And back to both. Onto the left mag. And again back to both. So the mags are set. We'll cycle the prop levers. There's our drop in RPM. And coming back up towards 2000 RPM, we'll just cycle those prop levers once more. Just to get some nice warm oil going through the system. And back up to 2000 RPM. Lastly, just checking the carb heats. They can both go to hot. And again, we are showing a slight drop in RPM there with the carb heat selected. So we'll go off again on the carb heat. They can both go back to the cold position. And again, coming back on the throttles.
nosotros ya y 5.000 pies aproximadamente pero va a ser la frecuencia. 8.000 pies. 8.000 pies por tránsito, tengo por 8.000 pies, ajusta la pero va a ser la frecuencia.
Just bring those throttles back to idle just below 1000 RPM. We don't want to go too low there and risk the engines cutting out. Anyway, we are ready for the takeoff, so Peter Heat can go on. We'll get the landing lights on. And just before we depart, we'll check our fuel quantities once again. So good fuel load there on the left. And the same there on the right. All set then, the park brake can come off. We're looking for 36 inches manifold pressure for the takeoff, so the top of the white arc. Coming up on the throttles, fully back on the stick. According to the manual, you pretty much fly the Boeing 247 off the ground in the 3-point attitude. So power is set. Temperatures and pressures looking good. And we're up. Speed coming up through 110 knots. So we'll pitch the nose up. Turn some of that airspeed into climb performance. And for the climb we're looking for 32 inches, so we'll come back to 32 inches on the manifold pressure. And we're looking for 2100 RPM. So just coming back on the prop levers. And we have 2100. Aircraft climbing away nicely now. We'll get the main valve off there on the primer. Obviously not going to need that anymore. We can do the same for the engine selector. The primer is already locked, so it's not a major concern there. So tracking out towards the north for the time being. As I said, we're just going to continue to climb down the valley here until we've cleared the worst of the high terrain. We're going to need to climb up to around 15,000 feet to do that. Leaving the town of Chagual behind us. And getting the aircraft nicely trimmed. The Boeing 247 does have quite a strange elevator trim. You can see it's basically just a rotary selector. Those oil temps looking pretty good there, so I think we'll actually close up the oil shutters even though we're in the climb. One thing I have noticed with the aircraft, both the oil temps, they tend to stay pretty low, and the same for the carb temps. Again, according to the manual, we need above 100 degrees Fahrenheit on the carb temps. I presume the selector here allows us to select the carburetor on the C position. The manual doesn't say as much, but currently they're only showing around 50 degrees, so a little bit cold on the carb temps versus the stated manual value. Got the aircraft nicely trimmed out now though, just a little bit lower than our target speed, so just pitching the nose down. Overall the 247 does fly pretty nicely once you've got it trimmed out. And of course as we climb, the manifold pressure there continuing to fall, so we'll just keep coming up on the throttles to maintain 32 inches. We're not particularly heavy here today, but again we do have quite a bit of altitude to gain. We've still got around 7,000 feet that we need to climb. We'll just keep reducing those mixtures as we do so. We're getting a nice climb rate out of the aircraft. We're doing over 2,000 feet per minute currently, so only in around another 3 minutes and we'll be up at cruise altitude. We'll continue to track up the valley north for the time being though, and then we'll be cutting across later on out towards the west. You can more or less see off at our 11 o'clock the valley that we're going to be turning as we track out westbound. I have to say I really like the view out of the 247, the big old Wasp engines there, they look really good. And overall the aircraft is modelled very nicely. It's a really nice effort from Wing42, although there are a couple of areas that I feel could use some improvement. Namely for me it's the sounds. There are quite a few cockpit switches and controls that are missing sound, or at the very least have very faint sounds. That kills the immersion slightly for me. And the engine sounds as well I think are one of the weaker aspects of the product. Internally they're nothing special, and externally in particular there's quite a lot of flanging you'll be able to hear from the engines. I think that's the correct technical term. Systems wise though, really one of the best aircraft we've seen in the sim to date. You'll already have seen that for yourselves as we ran through the startup, but the nuances in the systems operation and modelling is really good. You can see there the fuel pressure bouncing around, the oil temps coming up now that we've got those shutters closed. The oil pressure's looking good. All of the needles just moving around slightly as you'd expect to see from a real world aircraft. We've got a little bit of vibration there as well on the throttles and the prop levers. The aircraft really feels alive in terms of how it's modelled visually. Again, just those sounds don't quite match up with the rest of the product quality. But nonetheless, still a really nice effort, and especially for the price, a really good offering in the sim. Coming up through 11,000 feet, so another 4,000 feet here in the climb. Just check our left fuel quantity. A little bit like the Spitfire really, the 247, in as much as the fuel gauges ordinarily show 0, you've actually got to manually put some fuel pressure into the system. Just coming below 110 gallons now on the left. No surprise there, we're not expecting to have burned our way through too much fuel yet. Only requiring though very light pressure on the controls now that we've got the aircraft trimmed. It sits fairly stable, which is certainly a good thing because there's no autopilot on the Boeing 247. And it looks like Wing42 didn't opt to give us any autopilot functionality on the aircraft. Even the clipboard there, it would have been nice perhaps to have an autopilot option included on the clipboard, as we've seen with a number of other add-ons via the EFB. So definitely a really hands-on aircraft overall. It does fly pretty nicely, so again not a major issue, but if you do want to do some long hops it's all going to be stick and rudder flying. So again, what I assume is the carb air temp coming right down towards 0 degrees Fahrenheit there. I assume 1 and 4 denote the number 1 and 4 cylinder head temperatures, but again that would look to be a little bit low. We're only up around 100 degrees Fahrenheit. But I could be totally wrong on that. Again, with the lack of information in the manual, it's a little bit hard to say. And the manual is actually very nice, the manual that's included with the product, but it's quite lacking in information in some respects. There are certain cockpit controls that aren't actually explained in the manual. For example, we have aileron trim down here on the left, and that's not denoted in the manual. So again, you are left to guess a little bit with the aircraft. The checklists, as I mentioned, are a little bit lackluster. Hopefully at a future date the 247 will get a little bit more information included with it as a result. But overall it operates pretty much like any big twin, and certainly if you're familiar with the PMDG DC6 and the nuances of operating radial engines, then you shouldn't have too much of a struggle here with the 247. So we're now all the way up at full throttle, just about maintaining 31 inches. We've got another 2,000 feet here in the climb. We'll reduce those mixtures a little bit further. You can hear the engines there picking up a little bit more power as we do so. There's 13,000 feet. And here's our valley just off the left wing. We'll just continue to track out north for now. We'll clear the ridge of high terrain here off at our 11 o'clock. No point flying over it. I would imagine single engine performance in the 247 is pretty marginal. And the outside air temperature getting down to 40 degrees Fahrenheit, so getting close towards freezing now, but there's no precipitation around at our level. We're all good there. We've got the pitot heat on already. Fuel pressures and temperatures and pressures looking good. Definitely worth keeping a good eye on all of the gauges with the 247. It's actually relatively easy to induce a failure on the aircraft, which of course is really nice in the sim. It's one of the first aircraft that has decent systems modelling in terms of failures. That being said, overall I do find the 247 is probably a little bit too fragile. It's actually very easy to induce a failure, at least from my experience so far. Just come up through 14,000, so one to go. And as we're down to 110 gallons now on the left, we'll momentarily switch over to the right. We should have about 130 gallons there on the right. We'll just wait until we've got the aircraft levelled off to do that. And then we'll probably fly on the right tank all the way out towards Trujillo. Looks like our level as well is going to keep us just below the cloud base, so that's good for us in terms of any icing. And another 200 feet here in the climb, and then we'll get the aircraft levelled off. So there's 15,000, we'll get the nose down. We're going to keep full throttle, cruise power settings around 27 to 29 inches, and up at this altitude we're only getting around 28 out of the aircraft. So nicely straight and level, just continuing to trim, the speed building. And for cruise power we're looking for 2,000 RPM, so we'll come back on the props. And there's our 2,000. We'll come back onto the right auxiliary tank, that should be the most full. Still showing 70 gallons there on the right. And there is just a little bit of cloud around at our level, so we'll weave our way through that. We'll try and avoid the worst of it. So there's oil temps down to around 40 degrees Fahrenheit now, which again seems incredibly cold. That's almost freezing, so I think there are some inaccuracies in the aircraft systems currently. But the 247, although it does currently have some issues, it shows a lot of promise overall. I think it's really just a question of a little bit of rehashing on some of the gauge modelling in terms of the parameters that the gauges show. And maybe a little bit of further work as well in terms of how these systems operate. As I said, to me the aircraft does feel a little bit too fragile in its current state. You can see the outside air temperature there around 30 degrees Fahrenheit, so the oil temperature is almost reading ambient temperature. We're running the engines at a reasonable power setting here, and again we do have those oil shutters closed up. Anyway, we're going to follow the valley off the nose out towards the southwest. We should pick up a fairly sizable road, and then we'll be following that in pretty much all the way inbound towards Trujillo itself. So welcome back to the cockpit. We're just approaching the last of the high terrain, as you can see. Heading inbound towards the Peruvian coastline and of course the town of Trujillo. We've already got the aircraft here in the descent, just coming slowly back off the throttles to avoid shock cooling the engines. And we've also taken the carb heats there as well, just to keep that carb temperature up. During the cruise, definitely noticed a few issues with the 247. The aircraft definitely seems to be very temperature sensitive overall. It's quite hard to keep within the correct ranges. Not helped by the fact that the gauges definitely don't read correctly. I did actually do a little bit of reading up on that whilst we're in the cruise, and it does seem that there are currently some issues with those temperature gauges. Wing42 have said that of course they're going to look to fix those up, but it's quite important on an aircraft like this, given that it's very easy to both overheat and actually overcool the engines on the 247, it seems. So far I found overcooling actually to be the issue. Since we were fairly high altitude there, you can see the air temperature currently around 30 degrees Fahrenheit, high speed as well, so we have a lot of cooling air going through the engine and no cowl flaps on those WASP engines to actually moderate the temperature. Really your only option there is to get the gear down, get a little bit more drag out of the aircraft just to reduce your airspeed, or otherwise descend into warmer air, which is effectively what we're doing now. But I have carried out a couple of flights in the aircraft ahead of the flight we're doing here, and it's very easy to damage and indeed destroy the engines on the Boeing 247, and as I mentioned during the departure, I would say overall the aircraft is actually a little bit overly fragile. At least it's very hard to manage correctly with the gauge issues that we currently have. Anyway, we're back down to around 16 inches on the manifold pressure. That's giving us a descent rate around 1,000 feet per minute. You can probably just about make out the coastline now off the nose. We've got about another 10 miles to run here towards the airport. Doing 130 knots currently, so about another 5 minutes till we reach destination. So currently I would say that the Wing42 Boeing 247 is a little bit of a diamond in the rough. It's really nice in terms of the level of detail and work that Wing42 have clearly put in. But there are quite a few issues that I found so far in terms of how all of that system's complexity is actually modelled within Microsoft Flight Simulator. And I don't hold Wing42 too accountable on that one. I think they're still working with an SDK that does make these sorts of things pretty hard work, and clearly they have put in a lot of effort. It's just a case of really refining what's there, I think. And certainly, as we'll discuss more at the end of the video, for the price, absolutely worth supporting Wing42. It's really nice to see a developer that has adjusted their pricing with the anticipation of selling a large number of units within the sim, and I think both based on that and their excellent work both with the 247 and of course the Blériot aircraft as well, really worth supporting them if you can and if you wish to, of course. Once again though, another really spectacular flight within the sim, really epic scenery, and the weather a real treat here as well. So I did enjoy our hop over the mountains there, but as I said, I have had a couple of other slightly more frustrating outings in the aircraft, although I think I'm starting to get a bit of a hang of the 247 now. But again, I do think it's just a little bit overly fragile currently. I've spent quite a bit of time in the PMDG DC6, and that thing tends to break down on me an awful lot less than the Boeing 247. Again, we are pretty light on checklists, and that's something else I read whilst we were in the cruise. There were a few complaints about the lack of checklists, and apparently Wing42 are working on both an interactive checklist in the sim as well as a PFD checklist, which will be my preferred option down the line. But again, the 247 is pretty much just your average big twin in a lot of respects, so we'll just run through our typical approach and landing checks. So the brakes are checked and off. Undercarriage we're going to hold. Mixtures we can just continue to increase there as we descend. Fuel pumps we don't have. Fuel quantities we can check, so we'll check the right main. Down to around 65 gallons there on the right main. we'll check the right auxiliary. And about the same there on the right auxiliary, so we've still got quite a bit more fuel in the right tank overall. And just checking the left main there as well. We've still got 110 gallons, so we'll definitely stay on the right tank for the approach and landing. Flight instruments. Once again, we do have the altimeter set, although I do wonder about the altimeter reading there, as we've gone with the standard pressure setting, but it looks like it's giving us an incorrect QNH. We'll see how we go on the approach. Directional gyro reading a heading of about 250, and the same there on the compass. Landing lights are on, harnesses are secure, and once again just checking those temperatures and pressures. Everything looking reasonable. That oil temperature is still pretty low. The OET is still currently 20 degrees Fahrenheit outside. Carb temp's looking good. And you can see the city of Trujillo now right off the nose. We're still a little bit high here currently, so we'll just continue to come back off the throttles. The airfield should be out to the north of the city, just out towards the east of the town of Huanchaco. So we'll come slightly left on our heading and then we can track north up the coastline. That should help us spot the airfield itself a little bit easier. Nice weather conditions though, so we're obviously clear of any high terrain. We've got a little bit off out at our 10 o'clock there, and more out on our right, but we're going to be tracking along the coast, so more or less clear of any terrain. Still slowly reducing those throttles. Another issue that I did notice in the cruise, the manual calls for a cruise power setting around 27 to 29 inches manifold pressure. Obviously we were just meeting that based on our cruise altitude, but it also calls for 2000 RPM, and I was unable to obtain that even with the props right back at fully course. It seems to me that with a high cruise power setting, the props currently don't have enough range to actually give you the required RPM from the manual. So it does seem on the aircraft there are quite a few inconsistencies in terms of how the manual wants you to fly the airframe as opposed to how the systems currently operate. But nonetheless, it is a very fun and very challenging aircraft to fly overall. Again, you really have to baby those Wasp engines, otherwise you're almost certainly going to induce some sort of failure. And on that note, just coming further back on the throttles. Definitely quite high here. We've got about 5 miles now to run towards the airfield, still up at 7,000 feet. So we'll keep just above idle power here just to avoid triggering the gear warning horn. Just enjoying the scenery here in the descent. Peru is a really spectacular country, well worth checking out the sim. It has a real variety of geography and flora and fauna as well. It doesn't take too long in any one direction to go from one type of scenery to a completely different one. So for that reason alone, it's quite good fun and quite a nice challenge as well with the high terrain. You've got desert environments and jungle environments, mountains as well, so again, an area that I would definitely recommend. Just come up through 6,000 feet. Not visual with the airfield at the moment, but I think it's buried behind this bank of cloud. Carb temp's still looking good. The carb air just about holding us at 100 degrees. Slight mismatch in our oil temperatures and pressures there. Looks like we're running slightly warmer on the left and a slightly higher oil pressure there on the right. So just keeping a good eye on the gauges. Again though, with those gauges being inaccurate, it's very hard to judge whether or not we actually need the oil cooler flaps open or not. I think for the time being we'll be okay. You can see Trujillo a little bit more clearly now, just passing off on the right of the aircraft. And the airfield, you can see that the coastline just curves around out towards the east and then back up towards the north. The airfield located just out to the south of the curve there in the coastline. So that's going to be a really nice, easy feature for us to spot. According to the real-world forecast, the wind should be pretty dead, so we'll probably come in from the southwest. Just make a straight approach over the coast. And we might track out over the water just to lose a little bit more altitude before we come back towards the airfield itself. We'll see how we go on that front. We've got a pretty nice descent right now. We're doing over 2,000 feet per minute, just coming up through 3,000 feet. But again, visually it doesn't look to me as though that's probably correct on the altimeter. It's always a little bit hard to judge altitude, but I think we're a bit higher currently. Anyway, for the time being, just turning to track the coastline. That's the gear warning horn, so just coming up slightly on the power levers. We don't want to take the gear just yet. And actually, in terms of our profile, we're probably okay to head more or less direct to the field. I can't make out the airstrip yet, but again, just basing it off the easterly curve on the coastline. The runway direction's more or less north, east, southwest. I think I can just about make out the runway now. So we'll just start a gentle turn on to final. We'll carry out our final checks. Pitch is full fine, undercarriage is down. Flaps we don't have. Landing clearance is not required, the runway is clear. Still showing 4 whites on the PAPI there at the moment, but we've got a few track miles to run here. We're pretty happy we're going to be back on profile as we turn on to final. Overall, the aircraft handles pretty nicely at approach speeds. We're currently doing 80 miles an hour. Needing fairly significant input on the controls here to actually change the flight path, but that's to be expected at low speeds. So we've got 3 whites now on the PAPI. And we'll try and get the aircraft off at the first exit there on our right. Make our way straight in towards the apron. So we're good on the PAPIs, just coming onto the runway centreline. We can afford to put ourselves a little bit low here on profile. We'll aim to land nearer the threshold. Just to give ourselves plenty of time to get the aircraft stopped. I can't imagine that the brakes on the 247 are particularly stellar. And we're not going to come all the way back to idle on the throttles. I do find that the engines on the 247 are fairly prone to cutting out if you come too far back on the power. So holding the aircraft off, getting ourselves nice and slow, There's touchdown. And you can hear the engines coughing a little bit there, so coming back up on the throttles. And we'll just make our way nice and slowly towards the runway exit. Coming onto the brakes. And vacating off to the right. So we'll just make our way in towards the terminal and we can get the aircraft shut down. Yeah, it felt good in the flare, but overall on touchdown, not particularly nice in terms of how it handled on the rudder. Rudder authority didn't feel great and it was very slow to respond. We do have marshaller off on our right, but we're not going to take the bay. As you can see, there's a pretty substantial pylon there in our way. So we'll just come into the next bay here off on the right. The 247 handles quite nicely on the ground, but again on the landing felt pretty odd. So onto the brakes, park brake can go on. And once again, nothing really in terms of checklist for the shutdown, so we'll just run through what's logical. The landing lights can come off. We'll reset the trim. I'd say we'd keep a good eye on those engine temperatures, but they don't seem to really be coming up and they're still showing pretty cold overall. So trim is set to neutral. And I think we are good for the shutdown, so we'll cut the left engine first. We'll just come back on the mixture. A little bit fiddly there on the levers using the mouse. So there's a good shutdown there on the left. And we'll do the same on the right. Seems the range of the lever doesn't necessarily correspond to the mouse. That's me bringing the mouse all the way down, the lever barely moves. And a good shutdown there on the right. So throttles can go to idle, mags can come off. We'll get the master ignition off. Fuel selector can go off. Engine selector can go off. And just having a quick scan around to make sure everything's configured correctly. The Boeing 247 does have a persistent state. Anyway, I think we're all good. We'll get the battery master off. And that's our shutdown checks complete. So there you go guys, I hope you enjoyed our outing in the Wing42 Boeing 247D. Once again, the easiest and most concise way for me to sum up the product in its current state. The Wing42 Boeing 247 is currently a real diamond in the rough. That is to say, it has a lot of excellent features, certainly shows a lot of promise, but I have found quite a few issues with the aircraft to date. Before we get into those, it's certainly worth mentioning that there is a ton of features on the aircraft that unfortunately we didn't have time to cover here today. Firstly, and probably most importantly, the aircraft does come with a reasonably in-depth failure modelling system. As we discussed during the flight, the aircraft will suffer the effects of poor management, both in terms of heating and cooling of the engines, the oil systems. On previous flights I've managed to induce an engine fire, an engine failure. I've also suffered a couple of electrical failures. You can actually blow fuses on the aircraft. I wouldn't say that the Boeing 247 is right up there with the likes of A2A in terms of systems modelling and fidelity, but it's certainly getting more towards that end of the spectrum. It is without a doubt, at least in theory, one of the most comprehensive aircraft in the sim to date in terms of systems modelling. Again, it does seem that the implementation is still currently a little bit rough around the edges, with some of the gauges not reading correctly. And as I say, a little bit of conjecture on my part, but I think overall the engines are actually a little bit too easy to damage in their current state. But that could also be mismanagement on my part, and again it is quite difficult currently to manage the engines correctly with the gauges not reading accurately. You'll also have noticed the clipboard up on the top of the main instrument panel combing, and again that provides quite a few features for the aircraft. Firstly, we have a whole host of ground equipment which you'll have seen both during the intro and the outro here. With the failures modelled on the aircraft, there's also some basic maintenance functionality via the clipboard. We can add and remove not only fuel but also oil from the aircraft, and we can also select different oil grades dependent on the outside air temperature. The Boeing 247 also comes with a team of AI ground crew who will take care of numerous tasks on the aircraft. For example, they will carry out maintenance tasks, they can also assist with the engine start process, and again add or remove various pieces of ground equipment. And on that note, the 247 is certainly not an aircraft that you just jump in and go. It does actually require quite a bit of time to get started up. Even if you want to work your way through things quickly, you will still have to wait for the ground engineer to carry out his tasks. For example, if you do want to change the oil grade on the engines, and again it would be prudent to do so if you want to operate the aircraft within its limitations, that's going to take the ground engineer a good few tens of seconds, if not closer towards a minute, to actually change the oil in each engine. So the 247 is really an aircraft for people that do enjoy accuracy and that little extra bit of immersion, again at the expense of being able to just jump in the aircraft and head off. In a similar vein, the Boeing 247 does also have a persistent state, and that seems to work pretty well overall. So it does pay to be meticulous with procedures on the aircraft, as the state that you leave the aircraft in is the state you'll find it again when you hop back in for a later flight. I did notice though a couple of little bugs there. For example, the fuel state often seems to reset back to 0 when you start a new flight. And similarly, loading up the aircraft's fuel via the clipboard I did find didn't necessarily equate to giving us a fuel load within the sim, and that did give me some issues with the engine start process. As I say though, the product does come with a lot of features, a lot of functionality, and it is on its way towards A2A levels of fidelity, albeit with a few issues that currently need ironing out. Just to touch on each of the typical categories briefly. Graphically, I think the attention to detail is very nice, the aircraft looks good both inside and out. Modelling is excellent, texturing is very good externally. It's also very good internally, although some people may not particularly enjoy the aesthetic that Wing42 have gone for internally, at least with the cockpit texturing. Systems wise, a lot of potential there, showing a lot of promise, but currently quite a few issues that do need sorting. I think we've discussed those already. The flight modelling overall was good, although there were a few issues that I found during the flight. The aircraft felt good in roll. I would say in pitch it tended to oscillate a little bit around our cruise altitude. The takeoff felt okay. The landing wasn't great in terms of the rudder response. It was very wallowy, quite slow to respond. And I found myself needing almost full rudder deflection there to really have any effect on the aircraft. The manual we've again discussed already, but I think it would be nice to have had a bit more information there. What is there in the manual is done very well, but there were certainly a few areas that I still had questions about having read the manual. And the same goes for the checklist. It would be nice to have some proper checklists with the aircraft. I gather that Wing42 will be adding those at a later date. Systems issues aside, and again it does sound like those are going to be fixed up, really my biggest area of concern with the aircraft currently are the sounds. It seems there are currently quite a few controls in the cockpit that don't have sounds, which is a little bit lackluster by Microsoft Flight Simulator standards. But by far my biggest disappointment with the aircraft is the engine sounds. Obviously on a big vintage radial twin you want some excellent engine sounds, and those really just aren't there at the moment with the Wing42 Boeing 247. Not only do the engines themselves sound kind of off, they sound quite raspy and rattly as opposed to a fairly deep tone to them. But as you'll have heard during the flight, there seems to be a really significant problem with, I think the term is flanging. Internally it's not great, but externally it's actually pretty bad. The engines don't sound very nice as a result. So for me, the sounds on the aircraft currently need some pretty serious work. In summary, I think that the Boeing 247D shows a lot of promise. It's very clear that Wing42 are really pushing the boundaries of what Microsoft Flight Simulator can actually achieve. The aircraft is already very usable in its current state, but it definitely has a ton more potential that I hope we'll see unlocked along the way. I think quite a few of these systems issues are really just lines of code that need a little bit of tweaking, so hopefully it won't take too long to see some fixes there. And for me, once those gauges are reading accurately, that's going to be a little bit of a game changer with the aircraft, certainly going to make flying the 247 a whole lot easier. As I mentioned during the flight, overall I think that the product is well worth supporting. It's really nice to see that Wing42 have put the product out at a very competitive price. Already the aircraft has to be one of the best value for money offerings in the sim. And whilst it's yet to be spot on, I don't think that's through a lack of effort, and I think it's really important that we do support developers who firstly seem to be putting the interests of the customer ahead of a profit, and secondly, again, seem to be really genuinely trying to push the boundaries of the sim. Anyway guys, once again I do hope you enjoyed our flight. If you did, please consider giving the video a like. If you want to see more content from the channel, then please consider subscribing as well. As ever, a huge thank you to my channel members and patrons for all of your support, it's very much appreciated. I hope that all of you are having a great day wherever you are, take really good care, and I will see you all again soon.